The Agenda in the Summer with Nam Kiwanuka is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Summer music festivals are back. So to celebrate all this July, the Agenda in the Summer revisits conversations with a diverse cast of musicians and music experts. Tonight, Tom Vanderbilt from 2016, my first year at TVO. Taste in everything from music to art may be subjective, but it's also much more complicated than that. Tom Vanderbilt is author of You May Also Like, Taste in an Age of Endless Choice, and he joins us for a look at how your preferences in pop culture and beyond both reflect and shape you. Welcome back, Tom.
Thank you, great to be here.
It's nice to have you back. So today we're going to talk about how taste informs our preferences in music and culture. How did taste come to be intertwined with our identity?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think one thing that happened in kind of society, I'm taking a very long, big picture view here, is that, you used to have sort of a simple, kind of feudal society, right? You had the nobles on top and sort of the peasantry below, and, the nobles liked one thing and everyone else liked something else. As more people began to have more money, you sort of had an emerging middle class, industrial revolution. More people had access to more things, so they started buying the same things. The question of identity then becomes a little more blurred. If we're all sort of alike, humans don't really love to be sort of have a certain similarity with other humans, but we always want to be a little bit different. It's been called conformist distinction. We sort of want to find this happy medium between being just a little bit special and being like everyone else. So if everyone can buy the same thing, how do you find this difference? So that's where kind of certain tastes began to emerge, where a minor change to your jacket or something would indicate some social difference. And I find this today, flash forward now to 2016, in a place like Brooklyn, New York, where I live, and you go to order a coffee at the kind of local, coffee shop, the artisanal, kind of hipster coffee place, and you feel a little bit intimidated. You're not quite sure, whether the thing you're ordering is the right thing to order, what it even is. There's always some new preparation you don't know about, because some new group has decided we don't want to drink that coffee that everyone else is drinking. We need to distinguish ourselves a little bit more. So the distinctions have gotten, pretty fine, and things that used to be like everyday objects can now be treated almost kind of like these luxury goods with people. What you choose really seems to say something about you.
Cell phones, right? That's a big one. But I want to talk to you about art. To what extent is there a correlation between one's social class and their taste in art?
I mean, I think all taste is somewhat linked to social class. I think that used to be a much stronger connection, though. And now we had something emerge in the last few decades that was been referred to as cultural omnivorousness, where people were no longer tied into these categories of highbrow and lowbrow. You could only like opera, but you couldn't like this other thing. And now it became more interesting and more compelling to just find what was good in all sorts of genres, and not sort of limit by the art form or the genre, but kind of free range across all these sorts of things. So you could be into opera and hip hop and this and that, and not simply discount something. So it's become a little bit harder, I think, to tell where someone is coming from. But more so than money, the argument has always been it's one's education that is the strongest kind of influencer of social taste. But the thing I'll say, the key takeaway here is that taste is very predictive of who you are and who you hang out with. And they've done studies looking at people's Facebook likes, and you can really infer a lot about that person just with a computer algorithm. Their sexual orientation, gender, race, political affiliation, all sorts of things just from the likes. I mean, it doesn't always work. Some people, people are always, have individual taste, but you can do a lot of finding out about a person from these, what they're displaying on Facebook, without knowing anything actually about that person.
In your book, you write about, I guess, the ebbs and flows of art in the art world. How at one point in history, certain art was considered, great, and then other parts of history it wasn't considered great. What do you attribute that to?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the late 19th century, the paintings that were selling for the most money are now today almost forgotten. The work that was considered very controversial, that was considered not to be art at the time, was something like the Impressionists, who are now selling for, their works sell for several hundred millions of dollars. You have blockbuster shows, people lining up the door. So, I mean, the thing here is that tastes always change, and it's really impossible to predict in any moment what is going to last from the current moment. Are the tastes we have right now going to be projected 10 or 20 years from now? It's just impossible to say, I think, on both a personal and a social level.
I find myself personally sometimes, if I go to the museum or to the art gallery, it's different. I guess some people might be drawn to a piece and other people might not be drawn. Do you think language?
Yeah, I mean, of course, the key thing there you said is like you've gone to an art museum or a gallery, and that's right away you're sort of being predisposed to think about what's inside that gallery or museum in a certain way. It is art, and you are probably supposed to like it if they've decided to show it in this gallery. There was a great experiment done in Belgium on the street. They took a famous Belgian artist and had him paint a work on a street, on a kind of a wall in Antwerp. And they then interviewed all these people in the art world, and they said, oh, yeah, of course, if people see this work by Luc Tuymans on the sidewalk, they're going to stop and look at it because he's a famous artist, he's a great artist, this is great art he's doing. They tracked this alleyway for about 24 hours. A lot of people walked by and hardly anyone stopped to look at it because they weren't expecting to look for art. They didn't know it was art. So, I mean, the point here is that a lot of what we think about art is because we've been told something is art, which comes with this whole set of expectations. And without that, you know, but they've done brain studies. You know, if you simply, like this glass by your side here, if someone tells me that's art, look at that, your brain actually kind of reacts in a different way versus, hey, look at that glass of water. I mean, you almost have to put yourself in a different set of shoes to think about art and have what they call, you know, an aesthetic experience.
We have an image here of French artist Marcel Duchamp's fountain. What makes it art to some and a urinal to others?
Yeah, but there's a great quote I like, that the art is what the art world says is art. I mean, you know, and no one thought a urinal could be art until Duchamp decided it was. And Andy Warhol had these famous Brillo boxes, and you know, it's a very slippery distinction because there was a actual painter who designed the original Brillo box for a company, and Andy Warhol thought that was a great piece of kind of pop art. He painted it, made a sculpture out of it. Why is one art and the other isn't? I mean, an art critic named Arthur Danto said, well, you could call one commercial art and the other is art. So again, getting back to that way we love to categorize things, and how we categorize things influences how we feel about them. But I mean, someone could probably make a pretty strong argument that the original Brillo box is
art,
as aesthetically pleasing as the sculpture. But Warhol just, you know, took it, thought about it in a different way, asked a new set of questions. And this is why, you know, art people always say art really shouldn't be about whether you like or dislike something, but whether it gets you to think about the world in a new way or challenge your own assumptions. But I mean, I think a lot of us do have a first response to something, which is very important. I like that or I don't. The challenge is to sort of get beyond that. If you don't like it, ask yourself why and spend some time with it.
I want to talk to you about music preferences, but first I'm going to show you a clip from a scene from the movie High Fidelity, where Jack Black's character, who works in a record store, insults a customer's music taste.
A record for my daughter for her birthday. I just called to say I love you. Do you have it?
Yeah,
Great.
we have it.
Great. Can I have it then?
No, you can't.
Why not?
Well, it's sentimental, tacky crap. That's why not. Do we look like the kind of store that sells I just called to say I love you? Go to the mall.
What's your problem?
Do you even know your daughter? There's no way she likes that song. Oh, is she in a coma?
Oh, okay, buddy. I didn't know it was pick on the middle-aged square guy day. My apologies. I'll be on my way.
Bye-bye.
Why do we judge our musical tastes?
I've been in record stores like that. I spent my whole college in that. But yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, Pierre Bourdieu, this famous French sociologist who thought a lot about taste, you know, thought that music really classifies so much more than other things. I mean, music is a very personal thing. Unlike movies, you know, people kind of listen to music privately. And I think, you know, a lot of us first love music in an age when we're forming a lot of social affiliations, or we decide who we're going to hang out with in a place like college or teenage years based on that music. And these are kind of ridiculous distinctions in some ways. And I remember having, you know, those sorts of arguments. It's a funny thing where, you know, obviously Jack Black and that character, their tastes are very far apart. But even people who have very similar interests, that's where the debates can get really nasty. Because if you think of like an obscure band, most people won't have even heard of it. But for someone to dislike an obscure band, they need to know that whole scene to begin with. So that's where the people may be very alike, but their tastes are, and that gets, super complicated.
I mean, I like Lionel Richie. Is it wrong to say that?
No, and every, Phil Collins is sort of having a kind of a moment of people are kind of into Phil Collins again and thinking again about his career. So who knows? I mean, it's well, we'll stop there.
We'll talk about that off camera. To what extent are music genres a form of social distinction?
Yeah, again, I mean, kind of getting back to what we were talking about omnivorousness, there are people who will decide they only like a certain genre or do not like a certain genre, and there are certain genres that are still, even the people who claim to be very open-minded, they will sort of not touch. I mean, maybe, kind of, I use the example of the Insane Clown Posse, which has a pretty strong group of fans, and these are fans that really feel like not only that music has been rejected by everyone else, but that almost they have been rejected by everyone else.
Who are the Insane Clown Posse?
This is kind of, their fans are called the Juggalos. It's sort of a, I guess they call themselves horrorcore was one genre name that was invented. Kind of a rap group that drinks Faygo soda and wears clown makeup and from the Detroit area. And I don't really know much of their music at all, but it interests me. Their albums have sold actually quite well. They've outsold the Arcade Fire on independent labels, but they really evoke a strong reaction, a negative reaction from a lot of other people, yet an equally strong positive reaction from. So it's like people have used that group as this way to situate themselves in the world and in opposition or relation to other people. So
Why might liking like the Insane Clown Posse be considered as having bad taste?
I mean, I try to stay away from it. I feel like, good taste or bad taste, there's nothing, I really think there's nothing inherent about it. It's just some group in some society at some historical moment decided what was acceptable to like and what was not, and that changes all the time. I mean, we can see, we were talking about the Impressionists was considered the absolute pinnacle of bad taste, of unacceptable art, and now you'd be considered a refined person if you had an impressionist painting on your wall. That would not be an act of bad taste. This stuff is always changing. It's always open to reinterpretation. Stuff can go away and come back. But I think good taste, bad taste. Another way that people are trying to put labels on people, distinguish themselves, often with a very kind of like subtle strategy in mind. And
do you think that also has to do with like community? Because, as you mentioned with the Insane Clown Posse, maybe they consider themselves outsiders, and then with them, like with the other people that like that music, it's forming like a social network.
Yeah, that can be a very, I think Insane Clown Posse in some ways where they have these gathering of the Juggalos, these sort of festivals where they get together, and it almost gets back to these kind of almost traditional meanings of music as ways to bring together a village or something, and they're kind of creating these villages. And it gets back to, we were talking about conformist distinction, this idea that people want to be like one another, but they also want to be a little bit different. And they've done studies where they've looked at certain subcultures, like people, I think with piercing was one idea. And I mean, when you get a subculture that considers itself very distinct from the mainstream, within that subculture, it actually becomes very conformist. Even kind of a very, a person who seems to be going against taste, they have their own set of tastes that are very strong. And if you don't like match the exact conformity of that group, that can create sort of a disconnect.
What about politics? Can we draw a correlation between a person's politics based on their favorite genre or artist?
There's been some interesting work done by a company called the Echo Nest, who Spotify purchased, and they do a lot of music intelligence. They call it analyzing things like people's playlists and then linking that up with Facebook likes. And there's been some correlations drawn. Republicans in the United States seem to prefer country music. More Democrats like hip hop. Some things don't seem to really predict much of anything at all. The Beatles are sort of so universally liked, it could go either way. One interesting thing to me was metal was also very unpredictable because you could have kind of many different ways into metal. There's many different types of metal. One of my favorite examples from the Echo Nest, they were looking at music genres. There's two music genres. One is called, these are kind of very obscure forms of music, let's say, but one is called hatecore, and another is called vegan punk. And hatecore is like sort of right wing, like vegan punk is kind of like left wing, vegan. The music actually sounds very similar, but obviously the lyrics to those songs are very different, and the people who like those sorts of songs are very different. So that's just all sorts of interesting correlations that can be drawn, though. And one last thing that stuck out is that Pink Floyd. Later Pink Floyd seemed to be liked by slightly more Republicans, and then kind of earlier Pink Floyd was more Democrats. Again, this is the United States. But,
Do you think that are conservatives more up into one genre or Democrats?
They show that Democrats were more kind of.
At 8:14 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time Wednesday, Environment Canada has issued a tornado warning for southwestern Ontario. Extra care and attention should be exercised in and around the following localities: Elgin. Environment Canada meteorologists are tracking a severe thunderstorm that is possibly producing a tornado. Damaging winds, large hail and locally intense rainfall are also possible. Take cover immediately if threatening weather approaches. Please consult local media for more information. À 20h14 avancée de l'Est le mercredi, Environnement Canada a émis une alerte de tornade pour le sud-ouest de l'Ontario. Une attention et des précautions additionnelles devraient être exercées près et autour des localités suivantes: Elgin. Les météorologues d'Environnement Canada surveillent un orage violent produisant possiblement une tornade. Des vents destructeurs, de la grosse grêle et de la pluie intense par endroits sont aussi possibles. Mettez-vous immédiatement à l'abri si un phénomène météorologique menaçant s'approche. Veuillez consulter les médias locaux pour plus d'informations.
Netflix is filled with a lot of things that I haven't gotten around to. I've had films sit in my house for a month and a half, and I feel really guilty that I'm not watching them because they're, some long kind of film with subtitles that is going to require a certain amount of mental energy, and I really, end of a long day, I just want to go to the instant streaming and find something I've already seen or some kind of action flick or something. So, but I think a lot of us. The whole point here is that a lot of us have many different sets of tastes, and we're not easily reducible to one thing. But all these online services, if you go to Google's ad preferences site, which I recommend that you do, and Google will predict who they think you are based on all the web searches you've done. And when I did this, it showed me to be a 25 to 34-year-old male with interested in action films and smartphones and some other things. And I was looking at that, I was like, well, I'm 47, so you got me so wrong, Google. And then I thought, well, wait a minute, they're actually looking at what I was into more than actually who I was. So maybe my tastes are just kind of that of a younger person. So I'm acting, I should start acting my age is the point, I guess. But
age is just a number. I tried doing that and it blocked me.
At 8:16 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time Wednesday, Environment Canada has issued a tornado warning for southwestern Ontario. Extra care and attention should be exercised in and around the following localities: Elgin. Environment Canada meteorologists are tracking a severe thunderstorm that is possibly producing a tornado. Damaging winds, large hail and locally intense rainfall are also possible. Take cover immediately if threatening weather approaches. Please consult local media for more information.
À 20h16 avancée de l'île le mercredi, Environnement Canada a émis une alerte de tornade pour le sud-ouest de l'Ontario. Une attention et des précautions additionnelles devraient être exercées près et autour des localités suivantes: Elgin. Les météorologues et Environnement Canada surveillent un orage violent produisant possiblement une tornade. Des vents destructeurs, de la grosse grêle et de la pluie intense par endroits sont aussi possibles. Mettez-vous immédiatement à l'abri si un phénomène météorologique menaçant s'approche. Veuillez consulter les médias locaux pour plus d'informations.
what are you playing next for them? Are you playing something kind of within the Glee universe or something within the original Fun universe? And this is a hard thing for a guy sitting in Silicon Valley in front of a computer to try to figure out. But you know, they're trying.
Do you think that these services will become substitutes for critics, like music critics?
No, again, I just spent an evening talking with a guy, Ben Ratliff at the New York Times, who's a critic who wrote a book called Every Song Ever, and it's an interesting take where he talks about how now we can listen to everything in the world, right? So how do you go through that? There's a service called Forgotify that has songs that have never been played on Spotify, not even once. There are 4 million songs on Forgotify. So that's all.
Insane.
I don't have time left in my life to listen to all those songs.
Yeah.
So Ben, he'll pick a theme like silence or something. He'll give you just a way to listen to music, and then his playlists are very eclectic, going across genres and stuff. But just thinking about new ways, now that you have all this stuff, it doesn't necessarily work to do it the old way, just play one album after another, because there's a lot more interesting things you can do. You can draw from everything, and you just almost need to be more creative. And critics are the ones who have some of these chops to kind of think in those terms, I think.
What I found fascinating.
At 8:16 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time Wednesday, Environment Canada has issued a tornado warning for southwestern Ontario. Extra care and attention should be exercised in and around the following localities. Belgian. Environment Canada meteorologists are tracking a severe thunderstorm that is possibly producing a tornado. Damaging winds, large hail and locally intense rainfall are also possible. Take cover immediately if threatening weather approaches. Please consult local media for more information.
À 20h16 heure avancée de l'île mercredi, Environnement Canada a émis une alerte de tornade pour le sud-ouest de l'Ontario. Une attention et des précautions additionnelles devraient être exercées près et autour des localités suivantes. Les météorologues et Environnement Canada surveillent un orage viol produisant possiblement une tornade. Des vents destructeurs, de la grosse grêle et de la pluie intense par endroits sont aussi possibles. Mettez-vous immédiatement à l'abri si un phénomène météorologique menaçant s'approche. Veuillez consulter les médias locaux pour plus d'informations.
In Boston, the Museum of Bad Art, but what's funny about this guy is he doesn't just collect anything. He has a very strong set of criteria for what is good, bad art. He doesn't just take Velvet Elvises off the sidewalk. It has to be something where he thought someone really tried, had an interesting idea, maybe failed for some reason, or it just spoke to him in some way, which I think is key with a lot of these things. You don't necessarily know how you feel about something in the beginning. And fMRI research has shown this, that you show pictures to people of people they do not like. Certain parts of the brain that are activated are the same exact regions that are activated in an act like feelings of romantic love. So in some ways, this old cliche of there's a thin line between love and hate are perhaps actually true. So a strong reaction, it might be, we're not sure yet, but we know we're going to feel, we're either going to love it or hate it, but in the beginning it might be a little unclear.
And when we talk about these terms like hate watching, guilty pleasure, etc., to what extent has taste lost all meaning?
Guilty pleasure, I feel like we need to unpack this a little bit, because I find you were asking before about good taste and bad taste. And guilty pleasure has been one of these strategies, I think, where people who thought they had the good taste were trying to kind of control other people's behavior by stating what should be a guilty pleasure. And if you go back to the 19th century when the novel was coming out, it sounds kind of funny now, but the novel as an art form used to be considered kind of a frivolous thing that women in particular were doing. Like the men were reading serious philosophy books, women were reading these, like Jane Austen was considered almost like a romance novelist today. This was kind of lightweight stuff. And so I did this experiment where I went to Shutterstock, the photo stock imagery site, and I typed in the word guilty pleasure, the phrase. And the whole page was filled with images of women eating chocolate. So and you talked about chocolate before, but like that what's the social message there? That women should not enjoy sweet stuff. This is kind of this is not necessarily the nicest thing to hear. Why isn't it pictures of men eating nachos, or what name another guilty pleasure. I don't know. So again, it's
a bit sexist. And also, too, the two words, guilty and pleasure, don't really, they're two different things, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is a complicated thing also. I mean, does some of the pleasure come from the guilt you're feeling? Do you, again, we could talk for a long time about that.
Well, before you leave, I wanted to ask you, top 5 on your music playlist.
Oh, geez.
Where's your phone?
Of all time, or no?
Whenever, however.
No, I don't know. I mean, I have very crazy tastes that are all over the place, but I love, Chet Baker and jazz. I mean, I have a sweet spot for music of my youth, which could range from, East Coast hip hop to new wave alternative, so I mean, anything in that comfort zone. But I'm always trying to change things. I'm trying to think of a recent taste that I came to like, and I'm absolutely striking out here.
Well, I was just thinking when you were talking about the likes, how all these algorithms are deciding what you like. It kind of feels like it takes away the fun from when you were in the record store. Maybe just because I'm old, but when you were in the record store and you could find something by accident.
Yeah.
But now you're relying on someone to say, okay, you like this artist, so then you like that artist. And right now, you just said you like things from very opposite genres.
Yeah. I mean, but it is that stuff does still cough up something that I might not have heard of. I've had very many pleasant surprises just from a Spotify or Pandora, stuff that I might not have thought about actually getting to, and kind of you do that moment where you're like, wait, what's this?
Yeah.
And even before you've seen what it is, you're drawn to it, and that's really the greatest way to. I use the example of these VW commercials, where they will use an artist like Nick Drake. A song like Pink Moon, which used to be a very obscure song, you play it in a commercial, no one knows what it is. They don't know whether they're supposed to like it or not. They have no preconception of that it was an English folk artist from the early 70s. I mean, people don't really love that, right? But presented in this anonymous way, you could kind of think of it with an open mind. And it turned out a lot of people really liked Nick Drake, and he's become more popular than ever 3 decades after the fact.
Yeah, without any bias, right?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Tom, for helping us understand what it is that we like and why we like it.
Thank you.
And that is tonight's Agenda in the Summer. I'm Nam Kiwanuka. Thanks for watching TVO and for joining us online at tvo.org. And we'll see you again next time.
The Agenda in the Summer with Nam Kiwanuka is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
The Agenda is always on. To catch up on conversations from this week or any week, visit our website, tvo.org/theagenda, or our YouTube page at youtube.com/theagenda. It's all there for whenever you want to watch.